The desert night was a living thing, its breath hot and dry, its skin an endless stretch of rippling dunes. The convoy moved through the narrow throat of a canyon, engines rumbling low, wheels and treads crunching over the sand. Tankers loaded with the last water reserves this sector would see for months roll between escort vehicles. To anyone watching from the ridges, the trail of dust looked like the lifeline of a dying world. Alira sat in the back of an armored crawler, helmet visor down, every muscle tense. She wasn't officially part of the security detail, just another hired hand to watch the cargo, but her reason for being here had nothing to do with the payment. 200 kilometers east, in a settlement half buried by dunes, families were waiting for these tanks. They wouldn't last another week without them. The warning came in light. Not sound! A sudden blossom of plasma fire across the canyon rim. The world erupted in blinding white, the air itself vibrating as heat slammed into metal and sand alike. The lead escort disintegrated in a spray of molten steel, sending fragments spinning into the night. Shouts rose, mingled with static screams over the comms. The desert wind caught the explosion's smoke, dragging it sideways, mixing it with a haze of burning flesh. Alira dropped low, instinct guiding her as she rolled behind a support strut. Her visor feet flickered, momentarily blind. By the time the display cleared, she saw them. Starship pirates, dark figures with heat-shielded armor, scrambling down the canyon walls like insects. Above, sleek drones swooped in tight arcs, their weapon ports glowing. A second blast punched into the convoy. Sand became shrapnel, slicing through unarmored skin. Somewhere to her left, one of the guards screamed until the sound cut off abruptly, leaving only the hiss of vaporizing water. Through the shifting smoke, she saw the source, a black, beetle-shaped drone hovering over the nearest tanker, its limbs unfolding like a predatory flower. Tubes shot out, latching onto the tanker's hull, the metal hissing as the device began draining. In that moment, the fight for water turned into the fight for the convoy's life. Pirates dropped to the ground, firing controlled bursts from plasma rifles. Each shot punched through armor as if it were paper. The guards tried to regroup, but the canyon walls offered no retreat, no cover, only the choke point the pirates had chosen perfectly. A sound drew Alira's gaze. A small figure, a boy, slipped from the rear of one of the tankers, stumbling toward the falling droplets shimmering in the smoky light. At first she thought he'd gone mad. Then she realized, to a child who hadn't seen rain in years, the mist from vaporized water must have looked like a miracle. She was already moving when the next blast came. The boy's thin body was caught in the shock wave, flung sideways into the open killing zone. She skidded to a stop as a plasma bolt scorched the sand where she would have been. Her visor's audio picked up a voice, sharp and cold. No witnesses, no survivors. Her teeth clenched. They weren't just taking the water, they were erasing anyone who might stand against them. If I do nothing, she thought, her hands tightening on the device strapped to her wrist, I'm the one killing them. Alira ducked behind a half-buried boulder, fingers finding the activation switch on the old, battered transmitter. Most thought it was useless tech, some artifact from a lost age. To her, it was the only card left to play. She glanced once toward the boy. He was lying still now, face turned away, dust settling over him like a shroud. The pirates moved methodically from vehicle to vehicle, the draining machine sucking away the convoy's reason for existing. She pressed a switch. The transmitter hummed, then pulsed in her palm. A low vibration spread out into the sand beneath her boots, radiating in all directions. Alira's breath slowed as she felt it, like an echo answering from deep below, older than the canyon, older than the roads carved through it. The ground trembled. At first it could have been mistaken for the lingering concussion of the blasts. But then the rhythm deepened, steady, purposeful. Sand shifted at the canyon's edge, sliding down in streams. The pirates paused, scanning, confused. A shadow passed under the surface, huge, formless, but moving with speed. The air changed. Even the desert wind seemed to hesitate. The tremor built, making tanker hulls rattle and rifles shake in unsteady hands. Alira felt it in her bones, the same way she had as a child when the old stories were whispered, the ghost of the desert, the thing that lived where no man dared dig too deep. One of the pirates shouted a warning, voice cracking, but it was too late. The sand behind him bulged, then split like water around a rising beast. A mass of pale, slick tentacles burst free, each as thick as a support beam, glistening under the moonlight. They snapped outward with terrifying speed, wrapping around two pirates and dragging them screaming into the dust. Drones swiveled, targeting the movement, but their first shots hit nothing but a blizzard of sand. The thing was already gone, sinking, then rising again, meters away, another set of limbs whipping through the air. Alira stood, pulse steady despite the chaos. This was what she'd called, what she'd gambled on. She didn't know if she could control it. Not yet, but she knew it hated intruders. Beneath the helmet, her lips curved into the faintest smile as she whispered to herself, "Time to see if the ghost remembers me." The canyon roared, not with gunfire, not with engines, but with the sound of something ancient answering a summons. And for the first time that night, the pirates hesitated. The desert had just chosen a side. 9 years before the convoy ambush, the desert had already claimed everything Alira cared about. The red drought was no act of nature. It was engineered. Starship pirates had dumped chemical waste into the main aquifer, turning the water crimson and poisonous. Within days, the sickness spread. Her father lasted 3 days, her mother barely 2. The medics said it was dehydration, but Alira remembered the smell-sharp metallic, the same scent that clung to pirate machinery. She had been 15, standing in the dust with nothing but a cracked canteen, watching the sky for a rain that would never come. That was the day she made her vow. Every pirate who profited from the drought would see their world burn. It wasn't long after that she discovered the one thing that made her different. The desert spoke in ways most people couldn't hear, the groan of shifting dunes, the subtle hum of subterranean movement. Alira could close her eyes, press her palm to the sand, and know whether the vibration came from a fuel hauler 10 kilometers away or the slow glide of something alive beneath the surface. At first it saved her life. She could avoid raiding parties, bypass predator nests, slip through smuggler routes undetected. But as her reputation grew, so did the price on her head. They called her the Sand Listener, and in the underworld the title meant trouble. She never traveled with the same crew twice, never stayed in one settlement for longer than a week. She learned to keep her face hidden, her voice low, her trust locked away. Outwardly, she was cold, steel, efficient, unshaken, a dealer in goods no one else dared move. Inwardly, she carried a list of names, each one written in her mind with the same red as the poisoned water. The world had been shrinking for years. More dunes, less green, entire valleys turned to salt flats. But now the black dry ice was coming. In 9 days, a weather anomaly would sweep the hemisphere, stripping moisture from the air and soil alike. When it passed, only the deepest, most guarded reserves would remain. For the pirates, that meant profit. For everyone else, it meant starvation. Alira's goal was clear: locate and breach the pirates' main water vault before the black dry hit. If she succeeded, she could redistribute enough to keep her target settlement alive through the worst of it. If she failed, there would be nothing left to save. She was in the lower market of an old refinery town when the offer came. The air was thick with the stink of oil and recycled coolant, the kind of smell that masked the more dangerous scents. Blood, fear, desperation. She had just sold a crate of salvage to a local trader when a shadow fell across her. He was older, his face a map of scars, his right arm replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic that whirred faintly. With every movement, "You're Alira," he said, "not a question." "That depends on who's asking," she replied, not looking up from the credit chit she was counting. "The kind of man who knows where the pirates keep their water." That made her pause. She looked at him then, saw the faded prisoner brand burned into his collarbone. "And why would you tell me?" His gaze flicked to a girl hovering a few steps behind him, maybe 12, clutching a battered water flask to her chest. "Because I'm done running, and because if I don't find someone like you, she won't survive the month." Alira studied the girl for a heartbeat longer, then met the man's eyes. "What do you want in return? Promise me you'll keep her safe. No matter what happens. That's not a small ask." He reached into his coat and produced a folded strip of synth paper. She could tell from the frayed edges and oil stains that it had been hidden for a long time. "This is the layout of their main vault. I helped build it before they decided I was more useful as a prisoner." She took the paper, scanning the rough lines and symbols. The vault was buried beneath an old cargo depot, fortified with triple security layers and automated sentries. Getting in would take more than skill. It would take luck and timing. "You don't understand," the man said, voice tightening. "They're worse than thirst. They'll destroy what you love just to remind you they can. If they know you're coming, they won't kill you right away. They'll take something first." She folded the paper and slipped it into her jacket. "Then I'll take something they love first." The girl's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Alira could tell she'd been taught to listen more than talk. The man nodded once, a grim sort of relief in his expression. 9 days, he said. "That's all you have." Later, as she sat in her hideout with the lights low, Alira spread the map on the table. Her fingers traced the entry points, her mind already breaking the job into stages: scout, breach, extraction. She'd need a distraction big enough to pull every pirate in the sector toward it, something that could smash through defenses no weapon in her arsenal could touch. Her hand drifted to the transmitter lying beside the map. It was small, unassuming, its metal casing worn smooth by years in the sand. She had found it in the ruins of a long-dead mining station, buried under a control console. At the time, she didn't know what it did, only that it pulsed when held to the ground. She knew now. It was a call, not for men, not for machines, for something older. Her parents' faces flickered in her mind, her father's cracked lips, her mother's trembling hands. She could hear the faint hiss of poisoned water spilling into the dust. She leaned back in her chair, the map and the transmitter between her and the rest of the world. 9 days. That was all she had to keep her promise, to the man, to the girl, to herself. And if the pirates thought they could starve her world again, they were about to learn what the desert sounded like when it screamed back. The desert storm rolled in without warning, a wall of ochre dust swallowing the horizon and turning daylight into a shifting blur. Alira crouched low on the ridge, visor polarized against the glare. Below, the pirates' convoy crept along a dried riverbed, 4 sand skimmers flanking a pair of tanker crawlers. Every instinct told her this was the route to the vault, or at least close enough to shadow them to the next relay point. She had tracked them for 2 days without incident. But something felt wrong. The comm in her ear clicked. A private channel she recognized. "Still chasing ghosts, Alira." The voice was smooth, smug. Her stomach tightened. "Karen, what do you want?" "A little professional courtesy," he replied. "And maybe a cut when I cash in." Before she could respond, her visor lit with incoming pings, 6 targeting locks snapping into place. Her breath hissed between her teeth. Karen hadn't called to warn her. He called to gloat. The first ion bolt tore the ridge apart, spraying molten sand into the air. She dove, rolling hard down the slope, every muscle screaming as she scrambled for cover. The second shot hit closer, the electric crackle burning through her shoulder plating. Pain lanced down her arm, sharp and hot, and she could smell the scorched composite. Her boots hit the flat of the riverbed just as the storm swallowed everything. Shapes moved in the haze, pirate riders on hoverbikes, engines snarling, cutting arcs through the dust. She sprinted between jagged rocks, pulse hammering. A third bolt caught her in the side, not deep enough to pierce fully, but enough to drive the air from her lungs. She stumbled, her blood mixing with the sand in a slow, dark trail. That was when she felt it. The vibrations began faint, almost lost beneath the thunder of engines and wind, but her senses caught them, low, rhythmic, deliberate. The ground under her boots shifted like something breathing. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant hiss that seemed to curl up from the marrow of the earth. Alira staggered to her knees, hand pressing into the sand. The pulse was there, unmistakable. She'd only ever felt it once before, years ago, in the ruins of the mining station where she'd found the transmitter. The next moment tore the desert open. Sand exploded upward in a geyser, a mass of pale, glistening tentacles erupting from below. Each one thick as a support beam, lined with ridged muscle that flexed like living steel. They moved with terrifying speed, sweeping across the riverbed. One struck a hoverbike mid-arc, wrapping around it with a wet, bone-deep crack before dragging it under in a spray of sand and blood. Pirates screamed over the comm, their voices breaking. "What the hell is that?" "Pull back, pull back." Alira rose to her feet, cradling her injured arm. Eyes locked on the immense bulk shifting beneath the surface. She didn't know if it could hear her words, but she'd felt the way it reacted to sound, to rhythm. "If you can hear me," she said, her voice low but steady, "look at that one." She pointed to a hoverbike cutting a wide circle through the storm, its rider firing wildly. The tentacle stilled for a fraction of a heartbeat. Then the ground split beneath the target, and 2 limbs shot up, striking with the precision of a predator. The rider barely had time to scream before the Kraken slammed him into the sand and pulled him under. Through the vibrations, she sensed something. Not words exactly, but intent, as if the earth itself was speaking. "Thief! Water! Destroy!" A flash of movement caught her eye. Karen! He was weaving between the chaos, his bike's stabilizers keeping him upright in the storm. She saw the gleam of his visor turn her way, the smug tilt of his head. He brought the pirates to her and expected to watch her die. The Kraken's nearest limb surged up, casting a shadow over him. Karen's expression shifted from arrogance to terror in an instant. He gunned the engine, but the limb was faster, wrapping around him and the bike in a crushing spiral. His scream cut through the storm, high and raw, then ended abruptly as the sand closed over him. For a moment, Alira just stood there, chest heaving. She should have felt relief. Justice served without her lifting a finger. But the way the Kraken's tentacles writhed, the way they snatched at every moving shape and range, made her throat tighten. It didn't care about sides. If she lost focus, if she didn't direct it, she could be next. 2 more bikes went down under its assault. the remaining pirates retreated, engines howling as they vanished into the storm. The Kraken's bulk shifted, tentacles curling back toward the depths. Alira felt the vibrations fading like the closing notes of a song. She pressed her palm to the sand, stilling her breath. "We're not finished," she murmured. "Not yet." The ground answered with a slow, deliberate pulse before going still. Then the desert swallowed its ghost again, leaving only the hiss of the wind and the blood-dark sand where Karen had been. Alira pulled her hood tight against the storm and started walking. The pirates would regroup, and next time there would be more of them. But she had seen what the Kraken could do, and now she knew she could call it. The thought was both a weapon and a warning, and it sat heavy in her chest as the storm closed around her. The plan had been simple, too simple, Alira would later realize. Strike a peripheral pirate outpost, cripple it in front of their own eyes, and lead the survivors crawling back to their leaders with the message that the desert was no longer theirs to rule. The chosen target was a water relay station, 2 squat metal domes anchored to the rock by thick steel pylons, a handful of armed guards, and a cluster of small atmospheric processors humming in the thin air. By every estimate, it should have been easy prey for the Kraken. She reached the ridge just before dawn, the first light turning the dunes into an ocean of molten gold. Below, the station sat quiet, its only movement the lazy sweep of a guard's helmet lamp across the perimeter. Alira crouched, pulled the transmitter from her belt, and pressed it into the sand. The familiar hum started, deep and low, radiating outward like ripples in still water. The earth answered. Sand shifted between the ridges, lifting in waves as the Kraken rose, the faint gleam of its pale limbs catching the newborn sunlight. It moved toward the station without hesitation, an unstoppable tide of muscle and rage. The first impact was spectacular. A tentacle slammed into the nearest dome, crumpling metal like wet paper. Guards scattered, shouting into comms, weapons spitting streaks of plasma that burned bright against the Kraken's slick hide. Another limb swept across the yard, tearing 2 atmospheric processors from their moorings and hurling them into the far wall. Alira moved in from the flank, keeping low, using the chaos to close the gap. She wanted to be close enough to finish the job personally if the Kraken's rampage wasn't enough. The pirates had to see her. They had to know there was a human directing the storm. Then the air changed. From the roof of the second dome, a series of metal rods extended upward, crackling as blue arcs leapt between them. The ground under her boots thrummed with an unnatural pulse, sharp and invasive. The Kraken's forward limbs recoiled as if burned. She felt the vibrations through her bones, pain, confusion, a shuddering resistance. "Electromagnetic net," she muttered, eyes narrowing. The pirates had prepared for something big. The rods extended their range, spinning the arcs into a shimmering web that draped across the station's perimeter. A tentacle brushed the edge, and the reaction was immediate. A convulsion, the thick muscle locking before the entire limb went slack. The Kraken bellowed. A sound like the wind through 1,000 miles of hollow stone, and tried to pull back. But the net clung to it, sizzling with every movement. On the comms a voice barked, sharp and exultant. "Lock it down! I want it alive!" Alira's visor tagged the source. The pirate commander, a broad man in black armor with a shock maul slung over his shoulder. "Bark shing no," he roared to his crew. "It'll make a fine pet for me." Alira stepped into the open, her voice cutting through the static. "A pet? It's your nightmare!" The commander's head snapped toward her. Even through the visor's tint, she saw the smile spread across his face. "Then I'll keep you both." Plasma fire chewed into the sand at her feet. She ducked behind a collapsed processor, returning fire with her rifle. Each shot aimed to keep the pirate's attention split between her and the thrashing Kraken. She could feel the creature's pain like a drumbeat under her skin, its movements growing sluggish as more limbs brushed the net. She had 2 options: call the Kraken back, let it sink into the dunes before the net fully paralyzed it, or push forward. Destroy the station now, and risk losing the creature entirely. Her mind raced. The Kraken was more than a weapon. It was her only true advantage against the pirates' overwhelming numbers. Losing it could mean losing the war before it even began. But leaving the station intact would signal weakness, and the pirates would only tighten their grip on the water routes. Through the haze of heat and dust, she saw the commander barking orders, men dragging heavy clamps toward the Kraken's immobilized limb. The sight tipped the scales. If they captured it, they'd study it, learn its vulnerabilities. Then no place in the desert would be safe for it, or for her. She rose from cover, switching her rifle to high output, and ran. Bullets of plasma hissed past, the smell of scorched sand filling her lungs. She reached the base of the first dome, planting an explosive charge against the weakened wall. Her visor warned of overheat, but she ignored it, vaulting over a barricade to place a second charge near the... Atmospheric processors still intact. The commander saw her then, pointing his maul in her direction. "Stop her!" Two pirates lunged from her left. She dropped one with a shot to the chest plate, spun, and slammed the butt of her rifle into the second's helmet. The Kraken screamed again, a rolling sound of fury and agony as another limb brushed the net. A timer read 10 seconds. She sprinted for the perimeter, diving behind a half-buried storage crate just as the first charge blew. The dome erupted, panels of steel and streams of boiling water vapor exploding outward. The second charge went a heartbeat later, ripping the processes apart in a cascade of fire and shrapnel. The shockwave hit the Kraken, knocking the net supports off balance. Blue arcs sputtered and died, and the creature surged forward with renewed force. One free limb lashed out, tearing a pylon from the ground and hurling it through the air. It smashed into the commander's guard lines, scattering them like debris. But victory was costly. The limb that had been caught in the net hung limp, its movements sluggish. The pale flesh blistered where the arcs had burned deep. The Kraken moved to cover her retreat, its bulk churning the sand into a storm, but Alira could see the damage. One tentacle was dragging, useless, leaving a dark, wet trail in the sand. They escaped into the dunes, the relay station burning behind them, the pirates' shouts fading into the distance. When they were far enough, she slowed, placing a hand against the trembling ground. The vibrations were weaker than before, uneven. The Kraken had lost more than mobility. It had lost part of its strength. She felt the wound like her own, a hollow ache that spread into her chest. The pirates now knew they could hurt it, and that knowledge would change everything. Alira stood alone on the dune's crest, watching the smoke rise against the morning sky. The message had been sent, but it carried a hidden cost. The enemy would come for her faster, smarter, and more prepared. And the next battle would be against an opponent who had just learned exactly where to strike. The fortress rose from the desert like a wound in the earth walls of black alloy, bristling with gun towers, anchored into the bedrock around a central silo that reached toward the sun. Beneath that silo lay the pirates' greatest prize, the main water vault, enough to keep 100 settlements alive for years. Alira crouched behind a jagged ridge, wind tugging at her cloak. In 2 hours, the black dry would sweep across the sector, scouring the air of its last moisture. If she didn't break the vault before then, her people wouldn't last the week. The Kraken waded beneath her, silent but restless. She could feel its pulse through the sand, deep and steady, like a war drum before the charge. She pressed her palm into the grit, sending the signal she'd refined over weeks, a call and a command all at once. The ground trembled in reply. They struck just after the fortress's outer patrol passed. The Kraken erupted from the dunes in a cascade of sand and debris, tentacles smashing into the western wall. Metal screamed, sentries toppled, and alarms wailed across the desert. Alira followed in its wake, sprinting toward the breach, rifle raised. Pirates poured from the gatehouse, firing plasma bursts that sizzled through the air. She weaved between cover, picking her shots, every round meant to keep them from rallying. Then she saw him. The old engineer, the man who had given her the vault's map, was shackled to a thick pipe jutting from the silo's base. 2 pirates held him in place, one with a blade at his throat. Her stomach twisted. The commander's voice boomed over the fortress combs. "You want your water, sand listener. You'll have to kill your friend to get it." Her breath caught. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be here. The Kraken smashed another section of wall, but even as it advanced, heavy cannons on the battlements began to glow, charging for a full volley strike. She had minutes, maybe less, before they cut the creature down. And only 2 hours before the black dry arrived. She darted into the shadow of the silo, keeping low. The old man's eyes found hers, wide and desperate. The pirates noticed her and shouted, but she was already moving, firing in quick bursts. One captor went down. The other ducked behind the pipe, dragging the engineer as a shield. Alira slid into cover, heart pounding. The main release valve for the vault was only meters away. Embedded in the pipe the engineer was chained to. Opening it would flood the desert with the vault's contents. A salvation for the settlements, but it would also send a torrent of high-pressure water straight through him. "Gong, hong, hi-hu." His voice cracked, loud enough for her to hear over the chaos. "If you hesitate, they win. Do it! Don't let my death mean nothing." Her throat tightened. "You want me to be like them?" she called back, voice shaking. "They've already taken everything from me. You can't save me, but you can save them." His gaze held hers, unwavering despite the blade still pressed to his neck. The Kraken bellowed, the sound shaking dust from the silo's upper beams. She could feel its pain through the sand. 2 more tentacles had been seared by cannon fire. Every second she waited risked losing it, and with it the only force capable of keeping the pirates from rebuilding. The commander stepped into view, shock maul in hand. "Well, make your choice, little desert rat. Your pet dies or your friend dies. Either way, you bleed." She thought of the children in the settlements, their faces cracked with thirst, eyes dulled by heat. She thought of her parents in their final hours, lips too dry to speak. Her hands trembled as she raised her weapon. Not at the commander, not at the guards, at the valve. Her shot hit dead center. The metal screamed as the release blew, the pipe splitting with a deafening crack. A roar of water burst forth, slamming into the engineer and the pirate holding him. They vanished in the flood before either could cry out. The torrent sprayed into the air, exploding into 1,000 glittering streams. The Kraken surged forward, emboldened, tearing into the remaining walls as water cascaded over its limbs. Pirates broke formation, some trying to flee, others scrambling to salvage what they could. The commander swung his maul toward her, but a tentacle intercepted, sweeping him into the air and hurling him into the crumbling gatehouse. Alira kept firing, driving the survivors back until the vault was nothing but twisted metal and pouring water. The streams spread into rivulets, racing down the dunes, carving paths toward the settlements beyond the horizon. For the first time in years, the desert smelled of rain. But in the spray she saw his face, the old man's eyes in that last moment, not afraid, not pleading, but resigned. It carved into her chest deeper than any blade. She had given the settlement's life, but at the cost of the one person who had trusted her without hesitation. The Kraken retreated into the dunes as the fortress collapsed, its wounded limbs dragging furrows in the sand. She didn't call it back. Her hands hung limp at her sides, the sound of rushing water fading under the hiss of the wind. She turned away from the ruin, her boots sinking into the wet grit. Every drop of water behind her was a victory, but the image of his face clung to her, heavy and unshakable. She had made the only choice she could, but she couldn't decide if that made her a savior or something far closer to the pirates she swore to destroy. The rain that wasn't rain still clung to the air 2 days after the vault's destruction. Thin streams wound through the cracked basins of the settlement, pooling in the old cisterns that hadn't seen water in years. People crowded around the makeshift reservoirs, faces lifted, hands cupping the cold flow as if they feared it might vanish if they blinked. Alira stood on the ridge above, watching them drink, listening to the laughter that sometimes broke into sobs. This was what she had fought for, what she had bled for. Yet it sat heavy in her chest, an ache that no victory could erase. Word had already begun to travel, carried faster than the water itself. Whispers in the market, murmurs in the camps. She killed the old man to win. It didn't matter that the pirates had chained him to the release valve. It didn't matter that he had begged her to act. Stories bent in the wind, and in some she was no better than the ones she had sworn to destroy. The stares she met were different now, some filled with gratitude, others with a wariness that edged on fear. The Kraken hadn't surfaced since the battle. She could still feel it sometimes. A faint pulse, deep below the dunes when she pressed her hand to the sand, but it was weaker, slower. The wounds from the fortress cannons had gone deep, and each day it seemed to sink further into the earth. She didn't call for it, not yet. Part of her wondered if it was hiding to heal or to die. She walked down into the settlement that evening, hood drawn low. Children darted between the water pools, their laughter chasing away, for a moment, the fatigue in her bones. One boy, no older than 8, broke from the group and approached her. His eyes were wide, his clothes still damp from splashing in the pools. "Are you a hero?" he asked. His voice carried the kind of innocent certainty that could shatter under the wrong answer. Alira hesitated, the question catching her off guard. She crouched to meet his gaze, the smell of wet sand thick in the air between them. "If a hero makes you cry," she said quietly, "then I don't want to be a hero." The boy frowned as if trying to solve a puzzle, then nodded slowly and ran back to his friends. She stayed where she was for a moment, watching the water ripple under their feet, wondering how long it would last before the desert claimed it again. That night she sat alone in her quarters, the map of the pirate routes spread across the table. Every red mark was a place she had hit or planned to hit. Every black mark was a place already stripped bare. The victory at the vault had bought time, nothing more. The black dry would pass. The rains would not return, and the pirates would rebuild somewhere else. The settlements would come to her again, asking for help, for protection, for blood. She thought of the engineer's face, the stillness in his eyes as the water took him. He had given her the key to victory and trusted her to use it. She had, and it had cost him everything. She told herself there had been no other way, but the words didn't soften the edge. How many more times would she stand in that place, weighing one life against many? How many more names would be added to the quiet list she carried? The wind outside shifted, carrying with it a deep, almost imperceptible tremor. She closed her eyes, feeling for it through the soles of her boots. The Kraken's pulse was still there, faint but steady. It was alive. She should have felt relief, but instead she felt the same weight pressing down. The creature had fought for her, bled for her. She had led it into a trap. It barely survived. Was she saving the desert, or was she simply dragging everything that trusted her into the fire? When dawn came, the settlement was already awake, voices rising over the sound of running water. Alira stepped out into the morning light, letting the warmth settle against her skin. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the pirates would be regrouping. Somewhere beneath them, the Kraken waited. The people here would look at her and see either salvation or a warning, depending on which story they believed. She didn't know yet which was closer to the truth. She only knew the fight wasn't over, and that each step forward would demand another choice like the one at the vault. Another sacrifice. Another face she might never forget. As she turned toward the desert, the boy's question echoed in her mind. "Are you a hero?" She had no answer for him now. Perhaps she never would. The stories spread faster than the water ever had. In the markets, in the shade of crumbling outposts, in the whispered corners of smuggler dens, they spoke of her, the woman who rode the Kraken beneath the dunes, who broke a fortress and brought rain to the desert. Some called her a savior. Others called her a curse. The name they gave her was the same in every tongue, the rider of the desert Kraken. It sounded like a crown, but to Alira it felt more like a chain. She walked among the settlements she had saved, watching children drink freely, hearing the rare sound of laughter in a land that had forgotten it. Yet the looks that followed her were not all gratitude. Some eyes carried suspicion, fear, or something colder. They knew about the engineer, or thought they did. Some believed she had chosen to kill him for victory, others that she had sacrificed him for herself. Either way, the legend they told now came with a shadow. She understood it. Power never came without cost, and the Kraken was more than power. It was a force that rewrote every fight it touched. She had called it from the deep and led it into battle, and in doing so had bound her name to its image. Whatever the creature was, whatever it became, people would see them as one. If it killed, the blood would be on her. If it saved, the glory would be hers. But both came tangled together, impossible to separate. The Kraken had not returned to the surface since the vault. Alira still felt it sometimes, a faint vibration when she pressed her hand to the sand, but it was weaker than before. Its rhythm irregular. Each day it drifted deeper, further from her reach. She told herself it was healing, but a quieter thought whispered that it might be leaving her behind. In the long nights she found herself speaking to it as if it could hear. She would sit outside her quarters, the stars sharp against the black sky, and let her fingers rest on the warm sand. "We're not done," she'd say softly. "We still have work to do." The wind would carry her words away, and the earth stayed silent. One evening, a messenger from the southern dunes arrived, a woman with cracked lips and eyes sunken from thirst. She had come to warn Alira. The pirates were rebuilding farther west with new weapons and stronger walls. They had learned from their defeats. They would not be caught unprepared again. The message struck harder than the heat. Victory had been nothing more than a pause. The desert's war was still unwon, and every battle from here would be harder, bloodier. Alira's mind turned to the wounded Kraken. Without it, she was just one fighter against an army. With it, she might still win, but at what cost? How many more would she have to sacrifice to keep the settlements alive? The question clawed at her, the same one that had haunted her since the vault. How far would she go before the line between her and the pirates disappeared entirely? She thought of the old man's voice in those last moments, the steel in his eyes when he told her to act. She thought of the boy who asked if she was a hero. She still had no answer for him. Perhaps there wasn't one. Perhaps heroism was nothing more than the will to choose, even when every choice cut deep. That night she carved the words into the inside of her gauntlet, where only she could see them. Power is not to hold everything, but to choose what is worth holding. If victory forces you to lose yourself, make sure what remains is worth living for. She needed the reminder. Legends had a way of making you forget the truth. At dawn, she stood on the tallest dune overlooking the settlement. The wind whipped her cloak around her, carrying grains of sand that stung her skin. She crouched, pressing her palm flat to the ground. The vibrations came faintly, far below, a slow, uneven beat, fragile as a dying ember. It was the Kraken, but changed, its presence thinner, almost hesitant. She closed her eyes. "If to save this world, I must give up the only creature that calls me ally, will I?" she whispered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. The pulse beneath her hand wavered, then steadied for a heartbeat before fading again. She didn't know if it was an answer or just a shifting of the earth. She didn't know if, when the time came, the Kraken would rise to her call, or if it would leave her to fight alone. When she stood, the horizon was a line of gold against the pale sky. Somewhere beyond it, the pirates were sharpening their blades and sealing their walls. Somewhere beneath it, her only true ally lay hidden in the dark, nursing wounds she couldn't heal. The world would remember the rider of the desert Kraken as a legend, but legends couldn't save the thirsty or stop the storms. Only choices could, and each one she made from here would cut closer to the bone. Alira turned from the ridge and began the long walk into the dunes, the wind swallowing her shape until she was just another shadow in the desert. Behind her the sand settled, hiding the faint, almost imperceptible tremor that pulsed far below. Whether it was a promise or farewell, she couldn't yet tell.